Welcome to the Community Music Learning IJCM Conversation Series. My name is Alicia de Bánffy-Hall, and together with Roger Mantie, we are hosting the series.
Just as a reminder to everyone, this podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as another reminder to listeners, this podcast series is a volunteer effort with no financial incentives for anyone. So hitting the subscribe button not only helps to raise the profile of the series, but it also helps you so you don't miss an episode.
We're here today with Deanna Yerichuk, Associate Professor in the Faculty of Music at Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada. And Deanna is also the director of the Laurier Center for Music in the Community. Welcome, Deanna.
Hi. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Deanna, to lead off, can you tell us a little bit about how you became involved with the field of community music?
It's a great question. I would say I've always been community focused in my work, straight from I lived in the far north when I was in grade 5 and 6, and we were, it was a very small community, and I think I valued community very much right then. That was a very formative experience. But since then, I've always had, I'd say, a split career in both performance as an actor and a singer, and also working in social services. And I think I've always wanted my arts practice to make some sort of positive difference in the world. So I started doing that by getting a diploma in music theater. Then I got my Bachelor of Arts in English. And that's where I was introduced to cultural analysis and kind of a more of a critical reflection. So when I started my master's, I was teaching singing lessons, and I went into adult education for my master's. Which allowed me to think about the transformative potential of singing. I started conducting a women's choir in Toronto, Echo Women's Choir. And then I got a PhD in music education. And that's actually where I first realized there's actually a scholarly field of community music. I just kept working in community contexts. I really loved participatory music making. But it was in my PhD where I realized there's this emerging field. It was in 2009, so it was the journal was out for 2 years at that point, maybe. Mm-hmm. So that's where I discovered community music and was reading Kari Veblen and Bengt Olsen and Lee Higgins and kind of figuring out my own stuff. So it actually, just a little quick fun fact is that I was at U of T, University of Toronto, and they didn't subscribe to the IJCM back then, so I subscribed myself. So I actually got the physical copies of the journals, and I still have those on my shelf here in my office. So they're
nice.
Yeah, that was how committed I was to community music when I first started my PhD.
Very nice, very nice.
Deanna, you work at Wilfrid Laurier University. Can you tell us more about what you do there?
Yeah, certainly. I'm in the Faculty of Music here at Laurier, we call it. It's in southwestern Ontario, close to Toronto. I feel really lucky. I get to coordinate the undergraduate specialization in community music. This means that I work with students who get musical training and facilitation training to be able to lead participatory music in a variety of community contexts. So that's really exciting. I also get to teach in our graduate community music programs. We have a master's and a PhD in community music as well, which my colleague Lee Willingham is the coordinator of those programs. So I get to be a part of that. And then recently, I guess you've already said, but I got to become director of the Laurier Center for Music in the Community. So this is a research center that's focusing on research to support participatory music practice. So I get to work with an incredible group of scholars here in the region and also globally on forwarding research, knowledge mobilization. That's really exciting too.
That's fantastic. So, Deanna, in the interest of full disclosure to listeners, we should probably acknowledge that both you and I did our PhDs at the University of Toronto.
That's right.
Not quite at the same time, but we did have the same dissertation.
That's
supervisor.
right. We're dissertation siblings.
Exactly.
I believe that's called.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, we also both share an interest in some of the historical aspects of community music as they developed in Canada and the United States as part of what some people know as the settlement movement of the early 20th century, vestiges of which I think still remain today in such things as the community music schools of Toronto, a vibrant community music school here. What are your thoughts on some of the parallel discourses of community music as this might relate to community music activity globally?
Really good question. Actually, there are two music schools that were the first music schools open in Canada or among the first, are still operating. There's University Settlement House Music School in Toronto, and a St. Christopher House Music School, I think, is still operating.
As community music schools.
As community music schools.
For people,
right.
yeah, and maybe you want to explain a little bit for listeners who may not be familiar with that particular term, because I think I could be wrong, but I think it's very specific or particular to Canada and the United States, this idea of a community music school.
Yeah.
Can I add something? Can you also explain, I was just thinking the whole settlement movement, because again, I think that's probably also quite specific to a maybe North American context.
It's actually not specific, so I'm glad you asked that too. So, and this is all fresh on my mind because it was my dissertation, which is 10 years old now, which is shocking that much time has passed. But I'm actually working on a manuscript right now based on that information, based on my dissertation. So I'll get to the question about the settlement houses and the community music schools, but I would say that a lot of CM writing locates community music in the field in the 1960s cultural democracy movement in the United Kingdom. And I know that movement was really pivotal. That was a really important moment in shaping what contemporary community music looks like. But for me, that's only telling a part of the story. And frankly, maybe also the nicer part, because that tells the story of community music as the scrappy underdog that's outside of and fighting against injustice, that's like there to be the radical movement to, open up and address the systems of oppression in music and through music, right? So that's a really wonderful story for us to tell ourselves. But in fact, community music as a term, which is what I started to wonder when I started my PhD, is like, well, who started using that term? We've been making music for forever, but who started using the term community music and under what conditions? And it actually began in the 1800s, 1900s with the settlement movement, which actually began in London, England. So the first settlement house, these settlement houses popped up in the wake of industrialization. And it was local organizers who saw that poverty was happening even when people were working really hard. So there's a really important impetus of the work that they were focusing on.
Is that Bánffy-Hall, right?
Yeah, Bánffy-Hall, exactly. So Bánffy-Hall was the very first settlement house. And then people social reformers, social gospel folks, so people who were working in churches but felt like they actually needed to make an improvement in people's lives here and now and not just wait till heaven. So those folks were trying hard to make a difference. So these settlement houses began all over the world, and they were located in low-income neighborhoods in cities. In London, it was really about class, like bringing the upper and lower classes together. And then North America, there was a class thing, but it was also a cultural thing because there was quite a bit of new forms of immigration coming into the United States and to Canada. So these settlement houses were sort of grappling with what does it mean to have all this cultural diversity? What does it mean to have this quite a bit of income inequality for nation building? And these two nations were pretty small or new back then, not small, but new. So actually through that, they did all kinds of social activities and recreational activities. They felt like group activities and building relationships was the key to helping those communities fit better into society. And it was more of a fitting into society than changing the social conditions, although that shifted a little bit from house to house as well. And so music actually played a huge part in that. So there's a lot of social music like sing-alongs and carol sings and folk dancing and things like that. But through that, actually, then they started to organize music schools. And the music schools were focused on conservatory training. But the idea was that they would provide access to music to children and youth primarily who couldn't afford it. And so that actually was the beginnings of these community music schools that are huge in North America. I don't know if they're not a phenomenon elsewhere, but like a conservatoire kind of tradition, but with low fees or no fees so that students or pupils could access it if they're coming from low-income households. So
and I suppose, for listeners who may have heard of the Curtis Conservatory,
yes.
Curtis School of Music being, one of the most elite conservatories in the world. For people who don't know, if you get into Curtis, it's completely free.
That's right.
Because it started as a community music school.
That's right.
There are a few other examples of that, but that's maybe the most notable one that people might have be familiar with today.
That's right. So I think it's a fascinating history. I think it's a moment in which this idea that music could be used as a tool to social change, to personal betterment, to civic betterment, I think that's where that idea first started to really move into practice, or at least that's a really significant moment. Mm-hmm. But it's also important because I think that history, because it is more of a tool of conforming as opposed to a tool of resisting, that it actually means that community music also has this more complicated history, right? It implicates community music in colonization, where community music is actually more complicit in these unjust systems as opposed to like reactionary or outside or a mode of justice. So I think that's actually quite relevant for us now because those histories are asking us to examine our own positionality in these power relations. Mm-hmm. I mean, this idea of using music as a tool for social betterment, like who is making who better, who decides, how does that happen, right? So those are questions that are still very relevant today. And if we don't pay attention to those questions, we actually could be reinforcing a status quo, even when we're trying to do better, right? So so that's how I think this history is really relevant to us today.
Yeah, really relevant. I can't wait to read your book.
I can't wait to have finished writing it.
So in your 2019 article, From Inclusion to Inclusivity, a scoping review of community music scholarship in the International Journal of Community Music, which you co-authored with Justin Krah, this article has been cited loads and has really clearly resonated with people. I remember writing something in German and translated that work into German.
That was so exciting to hear that. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this article?
Yeah, I guess I'm both surprised and really heartened. So I'm a bit surprised because it was like a kind of a little project off the side of my desk one summer. Like it was the first summer that I was working here at Laurier. So I've actually never even presented on this research. It was just this little project where I was noticing that term inclusion or inclusivity were kind of showing up a lot of places, but there didn't seem to be a lot of focus on what that actually meant, like any definitions or like unpacking how that happened or, what are some pitfalls, all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, I'm really glad that it's been taken up because I feel like it's really important. But Justice Krah actually got involved as a second-year undergraduate student. He was in one of my classes, so I've already been having these like questions and thinking I'm going to do this little piece of research. And we were finishing this one class that he had with me. It was an intro to community music. And we were looking at an article, and in the article, it had said something like, whatever the thing was, it's open, everybody's welcome to come. It happens like it seems like mostly it's just white men that's there, but anyone's welcome to come. And Justice looked at it and he just threw his head up in the air. He's like, "That's bullshit," he said in class. And he started to like get outraged that this idea that it was just because anybody could come, that it was therefore fully inclusive, and that they seemed to be blind to the idea that actually there could be particular structures in place that would prevent people from joining and encourage other people from joining. So I asked him if he wanted to help me with this, and he said he would, and so we worked on this together. And so we came up with this article, and we did a companion piece in a book, Community Music at the Boundaries, edited by Lee Willingham. And so the fact that the articles has been cited excites me because I'm a new enough scholar that to see somebody cite my work is kind of an exciting moment for me. It's very cool. But what's more important to me is actually that I'm not saying that our article is the impetus, but definitely there's more. I'm seeing a lot more critical and careful scholarship in this last even 2 and 3 years that is paying more attention to these, to how power circulates within community music, questions about race, around class, around ability, around economics, around colonization, these questions that are absolutely important if we, in community music scholarship and practice, if there's a claim of social justice, we cannot move towards that without doing some very serious thinking about those intersectional modes of oppression and relations. So I'm really glad that this seems to have resonated for people.
Well, from what I can tell, I'm obviously familiar with your scholarship, but this topic of inclusivity has been a through line in your work. So, for example, I think, if I'm not mistaken, your first IJCM article was was one called "Grappling with Inclusion: Ethno-Cultural Diversity and Social Musical Experiences in Common Thread Community Chorus of Toronto," which I looked it up. It was 2015, and your most recent paper, which I do remember quite vividly, just because I was in the role of editor at that time, is called Fumbling Towards Community Engaged Opera, and that came out in 2023. So can you speak a little bit about what motivated you to do these studies, and what do you think the main takeaways are? Can you share a little bit about these two articles for listeners?
It's funny. In some ways, I feel like they're very different studies, but actually, in some ways, they're not. Like they're clearly both about singing. But it's clear that I think for me, there's two things that are running through my scholarship. So one is this question around inclusion, like how does inclusion happen? That also implies exclusion. So I'm thinking about those things a lot. The other thing that stands out for me is that I'm constantly questioning my own assumptions. So I guess I live by my axiom of being self-reflective and reflexive to really like critique my own work. So like this Common Thread article, I undertook the research to begin with because I was part of a community choir, Echo Community Choir, and there were a few other choirs in Toronto that were committed to social justice, and they really wanted the choir itself to be comprised of a really diverse group of people, and that they were constantly we were constantly worrying about it because we didn't reflect the cultural diversity of Toronto. Toronto is incredibly diverse. It's one of the diverse, maybe the most diverse city in the world. But these choirs were frankly mostly white middle-aged women, mostly. And so there was so why is that? So I began this article, this piece of research with that question: why? How does that happen? But as I got going in planning out the research, I realized that I was assuming that there was no cultural diversity. I was assuming that cultural diversity is marked by skin color and maybe by accent, maybe by language. And so I had to take a step back and say, well, actually, the first thing I need to do is to ask, how do those choir members identify their own ethnocultural backgrounds? And then how do they see that in relation to the choir goals of social justice and of celebrating this kind of diversity? So I kind of pulled out the rug from under my own feet there. So that was really important, actually, to recognize my own assumptions in that work, and to recognize there was actually quite a bit of diversity, and yet also it isn't really racially diverse, and to sort of recognize the kinds of choices that are made create exclusions and inclusions. Like they chose not to have any gospel songs because they didn't want any religion. They were a chorus, not a choir, and so they didn't sing any songs that were religious at all, as a way of keeping it open to everyone. But in fact, that policy, they didn't reject anyone, but some people chose not to be in it because they wanted gospel music, or they wanted, right, and by rejecting gospel music, they were actually rejecting a pretty significant Black history and Black form of music, right? So they were inadvertently, I think, creating some boundaries for themselves. But this always happens, right? Every time we make certain kinds of rules around, not rules, but parameters, I guess, to try to create this inclusive community, we are deciding where the bounds are, and that means that some people are going to be left out and some people will come. And then I would say in this most recent article on opera, those questions were much more clear. They were we struggled. It was Cynthia Kinnunen and I that co-wrote the article, and she was my research assistant for this particular project. It happened in the pandemic, which, was very difficult. Everybody's isolated. Like no two people in that entire opera project ever were in the same room together. The whole thing was put together in isolation. And we assembled some community members to be the opera chorus for the opera, which was really an interesting, a huge learning curve, but very difficult. It was really difficult, and especially difficult to how do we balance community member participation with the professional musicians, the singers and the musicians, and how do we do that in a way where everybody's really tired of the screen? So we needed to minimize the screen time and the rehearsal time, because it was like a year in, and people just didn't want to be on their computers that much.
Don't say.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you form community in those contexts? Mm-hmm. So this article is really us trying to work through those questions, and I really. I'm proud of that article. It hasn't gotten as much traction, I would say. But what I really hope that offers is an example of being upfront and direct about the complications, the tensions, the paradoxes that we experienced. And I actually think I would encourage more community musicians, more music scholarship to do that more, because that actually allows us to deepen and nuance the field a lot more by by leaning into and trying to shine a light on the things that are hard about this work, so that we can talk through it and figure out, how to move through these challenges and these paradoxes, as opposed to just assuming everything is awesome all the time and we just need to sell our project really well and use research to sell it. Like that, to me, I think we're beyond that, and I think it's time to really grapple. That's the other word. I was like, I think I put grapple in every article I've ever written. So maybe if I ever get a festschrift, it's going to be called Grappling by Deanna. I don't know. I use that term a lot.
I like the word, and I've learned it from you. I know. I've noticed that too. But I think it's a really good word, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's grappling and fumbling. I like it because it feels like me, frankly. Like, I'm very rarely am I smooth about stuff. Like, so it, the fact that it's not easy, the work is not easy, and I'm not sure that there is like here's the answer. Like, we're never going to get it right. We just have to keep doing our best and learning and trying again, and finding joy in the moments as we go along. As scholars, I'm sorry, I keep using we, but the community music scholars and community music practitioners, right? Like, yeah, it's hard work. It's good work, and it's joyous work, but it's hard work. Yeah.
Really interesting. So we want to look forward a bit about what you're working on currently.
Ooh, yes.
So I've loved watching your the YouTube channel, Community Music in Canada. And there's, I think, 4 mini documentaries on it now. And I've watched them, and I've also used them in my teaching. I think they're beautiful, especially the Kehewin project. Can you tell us a bit about what you're working on at the moment, and maybe also this project?
Yeah, you bet. Actually, there's 8 documentaries now. We've launched all of them. I might try to squeeze one more in, but we have 8. So the project is basically finished, unless I can squeeze this in. But I love it. I love this project. It's been really an amazing experience. So it's Community Music in Canada, and we've reached out to musicians and music organizations who are pretty experienced in working in participatory music, but particularly in what I've called culturally complex contexts. So I was thinking first in terms of Canada as a colonial nation, so like Indigenous led or Indigenous settler kinds of partnerships, and immigration, because Canada has high rates of immigration. But of course, cultural differences are way broader than that. So we of course opened it up a lot more to look at other sites and other kinds of complexities, with the idea of trying to figure out, of identifying what are some of the competencies that those musicians need in terms of knowledge, skills, and values. And the projects have been really incredible. And we used video because it's like kind of a video ethnography. So video allows us, we interview them, but it means that you can watch the videos and you can hear the musicians themselves in their own words, in their voices, describe their work. And we also, as much as we could, took video of them doing that work, so you get to actually see them doing the work. So yeah, it's really exciting. So yeah, Kehewin Native Dance Theatre is in central Alberta, and they're doing this incredible songwriting project with Indigenous youth to address a mental health crisis there. And they're using like song creation and language revitalization and healing from intergenerational trauma because of colonization. And it's just a beautiful work that they're doing. We also worked with the Vancouver Adapted Music Society. So this is a different kind of cultural difference. So this is a fully accessible recording studio. It might be the only one in Canada. And they work with people with all kinds of disabilities. And that was really extraordinary work that they're doing there. And there's like another project that comes to mind is Music from Hope. And this is a collective of 2 musicians based in Toronto. And they work with refugee youth and children. And do music creation and short workshops while those youth in Canada, when refugees first land, they basically have to stay in a hotel until they're able to find housing. So it usually is like maybe a month long, maybe longer, maybe shorter. So they've got these workshops to work with those children and youth that have just landed in Canada. And that's extraordinary work that they're doing too. So yeah, it's been like an amazing, really inspirational project to be able to sit with these incredible musicians doing this really incredible work in lots of different ways. So we're working on that. Yeah,
that's
and
amazing.
So we've got some plans to build a network of community musicians, because in Canada we're pretty isolated too. We don't have a network like in the UK. So this is the next phase is to start building a network of scholars and of musicians who are engaged in participatory musical work, and start to see if we can find ways to support each other and to build a thriving participatory music scene across the country.
Nice.
Deanna, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you
just
both.
Really
It's been wonderful.
So great.
great
to
that
connect
you've
with you
been here,
both.
and thank you, Laurie Hall, Anu Aldenhoff, and Gabriel Vincent for their work behind the scenes, producing and editing and organizing the podcast. And thank you for listening to the Community Music Learning IJCM Conversation Series. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.